Yeom Sang-sop's novella Before the Dawn, Mansejeon, is set in early 1920s colonial Korea. Through the journey home of an intellectual, it vividly depicts the contradictions and despair of a society under Japanese rule. In this essay, I will summarize the plot, characters, themes, and literary significance of Before the Dawn in detail, reflecting calmly on what we can learn from this work today. 1. Summary of the plot and structure. The protagonist, Lee In-hwa, is a student studying in Tokyo. One day, he receives a telegram that his wife in his hometown is gravely ill. He abandons his year-end exams and hastily sets out for home. The novel follows his journey from Tokyo to Korea, his wife's death, and his eventual return to Tokyo. Throughout this journey, the protagonist is confronted with the grim realities of colonial Korea, the decline of his family, and his own helplessness. The work is divided into 9 chapters, each corresponding to a leg of the protagonist's journey and his psychological changes. The structure, which traces his route from Tokyo to Shimonoseki, Busan, Gimcheon, Seoul, and back to Tokyo, forms a circular path. This travelogue format tightly interweaves his external movements with his internal reflections. 2. Characters and their symbolism. The protagonist, Lee In-hwa, represents the intellectual class of colonial Korea. He is torn between the comfort of life in Tokyo and the harsh reality of his homeland. He observes reality coldly but is too passive to change it. His older brother, a schoolteacher in Gimcheon, represents the declining middle class. His father in Seoul is obsessed with politics and honor, while his cousin, the family heir, is idle and clings to feudal traditions. Together, they symbolize the structural contradictions of colonial society and individual helplessness. Female characters such as Jongja and Ulla, whom he meets in Japan, offer temporary solace but cannot free him from reality. The death of his wife leaves him with deep guilt and helplessness, making him perceive Korea as a grave crawling with maggots. 3. The tragic portrait of colonial reality. The most striking feature of this work is its realistic depiction of the bleakness of colonial Korea. The protagonist experiences Japanese discrimination against Koreans firsthand and witnesses the impoverished, desperate lives of Koreans in places like Busan and on the train. To him, Korea is a grave crawling with maggots, a cemetery. This is not mere metaphor, it symbolizes the total despair of a society under violent colonial rule, economic exploitation, and lingering feudalism. The novel sharply criticizes how family systems, feudal ethics, and bureaucratic mindsets combine with colonial corruption to suffocate both individuals and society. The protagonist observes these realities but, unable to become an agent of change, ultimately flees back to Tokyo. This reflects both the self-examination and the limitations of the intellectual class of the time. 4. The meaning of the journey and inner change. The journey in Before the Dawn is not just a physical movement but also an inner journey of awakening and despair. At first, the protagonist is indifferent and passive, but as he witnesses Japanese discrimination, Korea's devastation, and his family's decline, he comes to see his homeland as a grave. However, this awakening does not lead to active resistance or change. Instead, it ends in his return to Tokyo, an act of escape. This ending symbolizes not only the protagonist's limits but also the helplessness of the entire intellectual class of the era. Had the protagonist attempted heroic change, the work's critical realism would have been weakened. Instead, the passive and despairing conclusion more truthfully reveals the reality of colonial Korea. 5. The symbolism of grave and death. The recurring images of grave, cemetery, and maggots throughout the novel symbolize that Korea's reality is already akin to death. This is not mere pessimism or nihilism. It reveals the passive existence and limitations of colonial subjects, as well as their desire to escape. The protagonist's despair hints at the possibility of national consciousness, even if it does not lead to direct action. 6. Literary significance and contemporary relevance. Before the Dawn is a landmark of realist literature, using a travelogue structure and sober prose to critique colonial reality. The author does not present heroic figures or dramatic change, but instead exposes the structural contradictions of society and individual limitations through a helpless, despairing intellectual. This work paved the way for Yeom Sang-sop's later masterpiece, 3 Generations, and is a milestone in Korean realist literature. Today, reading Before the Dawn, we realize that it does not merely depict the darkness of the past. Instead, it has the power to make us confront reality and reflect on ourselves. The protagonist's despair, helplessness, and escape still pose relevant questions. Do we have the courage to face reality and take small actions for change? Or are we still living in a grave of complacency? 7. Conclusion. Yeom Sang-sop's Before the Dawn is a masterpiece that realistically depicts the despair of colonial Korea and the helplessness of the individual. The protagonist's journey symbolizes the suffering and frustration of the Korean people, as well as the hopelessness of change. By ending not with heroism but with pessimism, despair, and resignation, the work leaves a deeper resonance. Even today, Before the Dawn quietly warns us not to stop confronting reality and reflecting on ourselves.